This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rapin. Joining me for a very special Ice Cream Man episode, the one and only Nick White.
Hey.
Nick and I are here today to talk about our favorite series, Ice Cream Man, and today in specific, we're going to be talking about Ice Cream Man Volume 7, Certain Descents. Full spoilers, by the way. If you're in the Volume 7 episode, you kind of got to expect that full spoilers are going to be here, but that's what's happening. This volume contains issues number 25 through 28, and as always, this series is written by W. Maxwell Prince with art by Martin Morazzo, colors by Chris O'Halloran, and letters by good old Neon. Nick, how are you feeling about this particular volume of Ice Cream Man before we dive into the nitty-gritty of it?
Yeah, I think it's a smaller volume than the last couple volumes. I don't really remember the rest only having 4 issues. This one's just got 4. One oversized issue to celebrate hitting the 25-issue mark. But despite there only being 4, they're all pretty dense. They've all got some pretty weighty heavy stuff to sort of dig into, so I think it should be pretty exciting.
Yeah, I definitely felt like this was one of the easiest volumes to read, so I don't know if I think that this one was as dense, so I'm really curious to understand why you think this one is more dense than previous volumes, or maybe I just was reading on the surface and I wasn't actually taking this book in. Let's dive in to see if that's the case. So I guess starting with issue number 25, you want to give us a quick little summary and then we can dive into our thoughts about it?
Yeah, I guess the summary would be that the kind of framework of this issue surrounds an airplane and all of the people on it, the crew, the captain, the passengers, dealing with the fact that they've had sort of, I think, like severe engine failure. Both engines are on fire. And they are beginning sort of an inevitable descent towards the ground. And during that time, we sort of hop between a passenger on the plane who seems pretty not okay with what's going on, which makes sense, while everyone else seems quite all right with it. And then we shift perspective several times to deal with several people who see the plane from the ground, and they're dealing with different circumstances themselves.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. I mean, beyond that, it's funny because I read this issue and I was kind of thinking, like, this is the most tense issue of Ice Cream Man I've read in a really long time. But when I finished it, I felt like a bubble burst and the tension was gone and everything was kind of released and everything was okay. So I don't know, like, it's so wild to see that, to find another situation of Ice Cream Man where something is insane is happening and to feel that tension, but for the first time in a long time, there isn't just a sense of like evil horribleness was the problem. And instead there's almost like an acceptance of the end. I don't know. I know I'm not touching too much onto the details of it, but that was kind of like my overall vibe of this issue. So wild for this series.
Yeah, I think it is kind of a meditation on coming to terms with something that is inevitable, and like sort of, I mean, almost like what, the 12 steps of grief or whatever, like you're fighting it, and then you're sort of accepting it, or at least trying to. And I think I think more recently with some of the last 2 or 3 volumes of Ice Cream Man, I think we've seen some of these issues where it's not just terrible shit happens, and that's a little reductive, but certainly some of the stories were like that, and recently I think we've had stories that are more like, terrible shit happens, but then what do you do with that, or what does that mean big picture, and I think that this is one of those issues as well.
I really found we got a ton of different stories, and I think you hinted at this in your summary here, but were they touching on different elements that we'd seen before in the series? I couldn't really make heads or tails of it, because I was like, yeah, we've kind of seen this, but also not. Like, especially the 2 like heroin addicts, right? It just reminded me of some of the earliest issues of Ice Cream Man where we saw those 2 folks who were doing drugs. I think we've come back to them maybe a couple times at this point in the series, right?
Yeah, and in terms of interconnectiveness, I don't really recall this issue playing around with that as much as some of the other ones in this volume. But you do sort of have this moment where you do encounter the pair of users from Ice Cream Man number 2. And I did think that was interesting, because in some ways you almost start to get this idea of what if time is what if time is like everything happening simultaneously, right? And that,
Yeah.
all of that crazy shit somewhere out there. Matthew McConaughey is crushing a can of beer and putting some cigarette butts into it.
Yes, exactly. And that's the thing about this series, right? Is where I think we as podcasters, I think this whole series has us been saying, is it all connected? What does it all mean?
Right.
And when we get these moments like this, it makes me think that maybe there is a grander story, but to what end? I think this issue in particular kind of spoke to me in a sense of thinking like, the signal or the ending of this issue kind of, we saw a repetitive like series of acceptance, people trying to find hope, or people trying to find something to relieve their anguish in their final moments of life, or in some terrible dire circumstance, even to the end where our protagonist, or the main character of this issue, Harold, he finally comes to accepting that we're all going down and that's it. And there's almost like a sense of bliss that comes from that. And to me, this makes me think, we've been talking about this issue after issue, volume after volume, like Ice Cream Man has infected the world with this kind of awfulness, and we see it propagate in myriads of different ways, right? But is this issue the sign that something is changing? And I think I personally think that that's the case, because especially given the bonus comic that came with this issue, this is the beginning of like something happening and changing for the world after all of the awful things that Ice Cream Man has kind of perpetuated out into the world, first in like direct action and later in like really subtle things. I think that's what we talked a lot about in the last volume of this. So I don't know, what's your take on things, Nick?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I do feel like this issue is maybe something of a shift, and obviously the most overt logic behind that would be the story, the extra story at the end of the issue, which is probably the closest thing we've gotten in a long time to Ice Cream Man, the book, attempting to perhaps revisit the whole Rick/Caleb showdown of sorts that existed, I want to say, largely in volumes 1 and 2 and maybe 3, but I think it was sort of put on ice before 3.
Yeah.
So we definitely get some of that. I did feel in some ways that this issue was in line with some of the more recent ones we've had, where Ice Cream Man really isn't at the forefront. We maybe don't see him much or really at all. And
right.
In certain issues, recent issues, we haven't even seen him. We haven't even heard about him. His presence doesn't even seem to be anywhere. And if you want to deep dive into it like we have, I think one of the things I've always felt is like at a certain point, the book hits some sort of an autopilot where Rick or Ricardus or Ice Cream Man, whatever you want to call him, basically says like, I don't need to get my hands dirty anymore. I don't even need to sort of wait in the wings and make sure everything works. Like, I've got everything running on autopilot now. I don't even need to be anywhere. All of these individuals and people and organizations are basically doing exactly what I want now. So you don't even need me. Period. Right. And this issue is like that up until near the very end, when Harold, the only passenger who seems somewhat distressed, or one of the few, because he encounters the flight attendant who is crying in the bathroom, and she tells him that the sorry, I've got that wrong. The flight attendant brings the bomb on the plane, sneaks it on in a carry-on, and this is told to Harold by the kid on the plane. The kid on the plane tells Harold that the flight attendant brought a bomb on, and that's what blew up the plane. Right.
And Harold ends up finding the flight attendant, and she's crying. She's like, he was just a smiling man. I didn't think that it would, he convinced
me. To me. Exactly.
that to us as longtime readers, we know that that's Ice Cream Man, right? Like,
right.
There's always a smiling face. I mean, we even see that in the bonus issue.
Yeah, exactly. So in that one moment, you sort of have your, oh, okay, so he is involved. Like, he has a presence in this issue.
Right. But I think we're, really in the mud on this. And I think that in a certain way, like, maybe us deriving this idea of, oh, Ice Cream Man doesn't need to be present, I think that's almost W. Maxwell Prince saying, I don't need to throw this guy in the story for you to understand who's causing this chaos, right? I think to that end, though, like, this is one of the first times in a while we've actually heard about Ice Cream Man being directly involved, even if he may have been directly involved in previous issues. And I know that we've had like bits and pieces like the Christmas issue and all that stuff, but still, it seems to be a less and less common thing. And it's interesting to see how chaotic an issue can be without a direct involvement. Instead, it's just the byproduct of something happening. So I don't know. This is an interesting issue, though, because it still ends with that calm moment. I think everybody ends with that calm moment in some capacity.
Well, I think the trickiest part of this issue for me, and I definitely got to that point like you did, where you sort of ask, like, is this a really negative issue or is it not? Mm-hmm. But the tricky thing to navigate for me is obviously the plane crashes, the black box is recovered. We have a scene towards the end of the issue where whatever the flight aviation safety board, whatever, is discussing the events. And what we find out is that the conversation between the pilots on the plane, which when we saw it before the plane crashed, was sort of them confessing their love for each other, and there's this romantic moment, blah, blah, blah. When we listen to the conversation on the black box, it's actually a very argumentative conversation.
Yeah.
One of them professing their love, and the other one's like, what are you even talking about? Like, are you crazy? And like, I hope this plane blows up now because this is like wild or whatever.
Yeah. I hate you, and I've always found you annoying, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you, I mean, what do you make of that, right?
Yeah.
Like, what do you do with that?
Yeah,
I mean, this is reductive thinking, right? But sometimes when you look at something like that, the real tempting question is just to go like, well, which one's real, right?
Right.
And that's a simple way of thinking, but which one's the truth? Which one, quote unquote, really happened?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think this whole volume kind of touches on the aspects of what is real and what isn't, and we'll talk about that, I think, in a couple of issues. I specifically am thinking about the Morphometasis issue, number 27, and then the end of 28. But still, I think that is the horror aspect of this issue, right? It's Ice Cream Man and us wondering, like, what's real, what isn't. Was this nice little thing that we saw, like, actually just a ruse the entire time? Maybe the plane was way more chaotic, but Harold, for some reason, found peace, and therefore that was kind of the vision that he saw in his final moments, right? We can't really know, but again, that is the question that I think a lot of Ice Cream Man always leaves us with: is this real? What actually happened sometimes? And Prince and Morazzo and co, like, they deliver this perfectly convincing story for us. And I love that. That's what makes this series great.
Well, and I think, and I forgot about this until now, but I do wonder if they sort of answer that question, right? Because in the order of things, the plane crashes, the National Safety Board reviews it, we have the black box, and we cut to the plane at the end, and there's a pair of birds over the wreckage, and I believe they're both blue jays. And if you recall, when the pilots are talking about reincarnation and what they believe in and how that happens, one of them says that he would like to come back as a blue jay, and so you have the two blue jays over the wreckage, and that is, I believe, the final image. And so if you consider the final image to be sort of the definitive word on that, well, then I guess I would look at that and say, well, then maybe what we saw on the plane was real, and the black maybe the black box is, well, I don't know, maybe that's Rick's doing, for all we know.
Right, and I mean, there's also that. I mean, we really have to eventually move on from this issue because I know there's a million things to unpack. But the two things that I want to point out about that is at the end. So they see the Blue Jays, but also we see nothing in the plane except for like the cross stitch that the old woman was doing. I don't think Morazzo and Prince are afraid of drawing violence. I don't think they're afraid of drawing like dead bodies. Right?
Certainly not.
So, but what I'm getting at is that there is no bodies, like, or there was no bodies in the plane. And I was kind of like, not like looking for it in a sick way, but I was like, they're going to show this, but yet there was nothing there. It's just the wreckage. The other thing
like
that I
a
thought,
rapture sort of thing.
Exactly. And it is a question of like, was there some like magical thing that happened here? Something that beyond the insanity of the world that's happening. So I found that to be interesting, as well as, you know, the sergeant they're reviewing the black box information. Like the sergeant just like doesn't care. He's just like, this is an absurd thing. Like, we all go down. They continue this mantra that I think W. Maxwell Prince sets up in this issue, that who knows what that could mean. I mean, I have my theories, but we'll talk about that at the end of the episode. But still, I found that to be really interesting, that there was still that question mark at the end. So I don't know, I guess I'm recalling it now because I didn't have it in my notes, but you reminded me of that question.
Yeah.
So I guess we should move on, though. I don't know if you had any final thoughts about that, but I do really want to talk about the bonus comic.
Yeah. Oh no, absolutely. Let's talk about the bonus comic. I think that's far and large for longtime readers of this series. And I appreciate the anthology element of it, but the fact that we are finally revisiting this is huge. It's huge.
Yeah, I felt like this issue was written for the both of us. Like, like somewhere out there in the ether, somehow this, us clamoring for more like quote unquote continuity with what's happening with the Ice Cream Man, and we finally got it in this bonus issue. You had told me that you had mentioned it to me way, way, way back, that this was like the big issue. I think even in the previous episode you mentioned that, and so. Finally getting to see it, I totally understand, because I think I finished that bonus comic and I texted you. I said, Nick, you got the bonus comic when you read it, right? You remember that? And you were like, Mike, I was screaming about this when it came out. I was like, okay.
Yep.
But yeah, this issue is insane because I didn't know what to expect. I kind of was like, got a hankering, I think like 2 or 3 pages in, because we're seeing all these insane like things that exist. Like, I don't even want to say deities. They are just otherworldly beings, things beyond imagination in some ways, like the pointillism monsters or whatever they were called, right? Like,
right, the tree people, the veiled brides, the candy stripers, and Satan,
and just good old Satan, which I thought was so funny, because I think that we've seen people like look at Ice Cream Man and think, oh, that's Satan, I think, right? But like the way that they talk about it is like Satan, who like doesn't really have a lot of power, just likes to fuck around. Like, I thought that was such a funny way to portray him.
Yeah. Because as it says, and what exactly are they up to? Well, as the comic says, all will bear witness to the grand and final trial of Ricardus, otherwise known as Rick. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to interrupt you to just continue on, but Rick, aka Ricardus, aka Ice Cream Man, aka many things. I found this to be so insane because I think we've talked about this in the past. We don't really know what the timeline is. And yet this feels like the quote-unquote final moments, and, the end of the issue even says, like, to be resolved later. But the thing that I found craziest is that Caleb is there, and so is the person whose name I can't remember, like the older man who kind of sends them off way, way, way back in the day when we see the desert issue, where there's Ricardus like, and Caleb and stuff.
Yeah, it's the I don't remember if it's technically their dad, but it's certainly a father figure. Yeah. And if I'm remembering this right, Rick turns into a giant spider and kills him.
That was the thing, is I thought that guy died. So the fact that he's there with this big book and they're putting Rick on trial, it's like, when did this happen? Or are these like otherworldly beings trying to eliminate this, what they call like a trickster demon or something, or chaos demon? I just want to know more.
Well, the issue does begin by saying that it happens many universe cycles from now. However you want to read into that or not.
And Star Wars was long, long ago, far, far away. So like,
and as for your questions about the two figures, right? Because we begin with sort of Rick being on trial, and we're greeted by these two figures, one who resembles Caleb and the other who resembles the old man, except their eyes are just like black, like pits, right? And at this point, we certainly think that the old man is dead, and Caleb, well, that's up for grabs depending upon what you want to believe, because he certainly seemed dead to rights in the back of that ambulance. But we've seen different characters in different issues that don't look quite like Caleb, but they look pretty close.
Well, and I mean, but we've talked to that to a certain extent of like different manifestations of these characters, right? Because Ice Cream Man doesn't look the same as other versions of Rick, you know. And can they change their form, or is it just an incarnation of who they currently are? Like, we don't know, and I don't know. We don't necessarily need an exact science on it, but it is like that kind of mystery question here of like, are they an embodiment of this idea, or is that actually them?
Right. And I think it's issue 28, and we'll touch on this a little bit later, that really brings a lot of the questions from this story and just turns them into more questions. But yeah, it's an interesting moment, and obviously it does end with us seeing Rick, who's in shackles and holding a spider. It's sort of amusing, right? It looks like the sort of like shackles and kind of straitjacket and everything that you would expect like a usual suspect to be like brought into court wearing, except like this is some weird otherworldly being, and I'm like, okay, like what do those shackles do? Are they metaphorical or something?
Right.
I don't see those being a real effective deterrent. But and I will bring up this because we will see it later. That big purple object, it almost looks like a diamond that you see. It's like a gate, that big like geometric image that everyone is making the procession into. We will see that again, and I do think that has meaning.
Okay.
That shape. And I specifically want to call that out for everyone who's been reading, and certainly been reading the most recent volumes. We've seen that green triangle that represents the ice cream cone, and we've seen that on signs, we've seen it on clothing, we've seen it on merchandise. I think the purple symbol, which is almost like a diamond, is actually sort of the whole symbol, or the inversion of the the green triangle. I swear I didn't spend all of yesterday with geometric shapes and went, what does it mean? But when we get to issue 28, you'll see what I'm getting at.
Yeah. So yeah, a lot of little pieces to pull away from this. I don't know. I'm very curious. You know, I love this preview. I love the implication of there maybe being some sort of end, or maybe some sort of other thing. But at least we're getting more of this story. So very exciting stuff. Yeah, we should move on to issue 26 because we've got 3 more issues to go here. So you know, this is an issue all about a person who is traversing their family tree from the top to the bottom to try to find the root of what they believe is the cause of their addiction. Things unfold a little bit differently, and they break one of the branches, which like I think kills one of their second cousins or something. But
right.
I like this little dumb metaphor issue. I thought it was a pretty fun idea to talk about a family history of addiction. You know, I think Morazzo and W. Maxwell Prince are just having fun with ideas at this point, and I love the way that this is all done together. I don't know, Nick, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, so issue 26 has the title of Unfortunate Ancestry. The kaleidoscope image, as we know, there's always a kaleidoscope page, is a tree with several branches, and the subtitle is Who Came Before You? You're right, the issue does kick off by saying, please rotate your book 90 degrees clockwise, and I'm like, oh boy, here we go. We're on to something. And we're greeted by this individual named Michael Arvek. He's climbing down his family tree because, quote, he wants to know why I am the way I am. Simple enough. I really love the structure of this issue. I love that as he's climbing down the tree and the branches extend, the branches as they shoot out, he sort of, Morazzo takes the middle of these branches and turns it into like a panel, an image of Michael's history. And it's just a really elegant way of navigating the panel, navigating the panel layout of something that could honestly get quite messy if you didn't know what you were doing. And so yeah, we sort of navigate through all these different relatives of his, I believe starting with his great-grandmother, great-grandparents.
Great-grandfather, basically coming to America, right?
Right, who's a calligrapher, and it's worth pointing out that his 2 big samples of calligraphy that we see, one of which says lickety-split, which of course has Ice Cream Man connotations, and the other says we're all going down, which, I mean, that one's not hard to figure out. That was just the last issue. Keep track, everyone. Come on, it's you can't even call it like a real recurring theme. We just saw it. And this individual, I think, like dies in an opium den after using it to cope with losing work. We get to his grandmother, Mary Ellen, clearly struggles with alcoholism. She's like working 14-hour days on a factory floor. And like she dies during the delivery of Michael's father.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just going through a couple more other relatives here just to give the brief outline. We have his father, JB. Clearly it's the 60s at this point, who's like going around busking for change. And as they say, like he's playing songs no one wants to hear anymore. And it's interesting because he's singing Rock in the Morning, Rock Around Noon, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure is a lyric from the Burned Out Musician in Ice Cream Man 3. And Rock Around whatever, Rock Around Noon or whatever, like that was his one big song, if you
Right.
recall.
Yeah. I wasn't sure if those connected back together just because I know this team likes to make callbacks to their own stuff. And we see some of it, I think, later. Still, I don't know. Is that the same? Well, we'll have to double check.
Oh,
We'll
no,
get the-
I don't think it's the musician. No.
No, yeah, I don't think it's the musician, but is it the same song? I mean, we'll have to check the books on that.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly the same time period because that guy was also playing in the 60s. So this guy ends up, apparently his brain gets heavily warped by LSD so that he would say things like, quote, this world is haunted by a man in an ice cream truck, if only they knew. So that was kind of cryptic. And, you know, Michael points out that his dad passed away last year, and by Michael's account, he's been, quote, drunk or high pretty much every day since. I did say in that image, please note, right below the image of Michael popping pills is Michael floating across a crosswalk, but behind him, but very, very small on the other end of the crosswalk, is Ice Cream Man.
It really... Hold on a second. Okay, continue. I'm looking.
Well,
this
there's a couple like very small Where's Waldo Ice Cream Man moments. There's even one on the cover of 25 with the giant plane going down. If you look in the upper right-hand corner of the plane, it's very small, but resting on the edge of the plane, of the wing is Ice Cream Man.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, if he's quite literally playing a smaller and smaller presence in things, it's funny that his physical presence seems to be so small in some of the few spots where you spot him, assuming you do. So I thought that was kind of interesting as well.
Yeah.
And there are other things in the tree that I think are worth pointing out. We have the vulture that shows up, and we also have the gremlin who was stealing the memory of the man who had Alzheimer's in Ice Cream Man 18. So,
are all these people related? That's the question, right?
Right. Yeah, that is that is the question. Maybe. I didn't even think about it in that framework. And yeah, I mean, overall, I think the big question, of course, is you have this theme of substance abuse that extends back beyond Michael, and he sort of wonders towards the end of the issue, like, did they contribute to his current situation? He sort of asks, was it inevitable due to their situation that he would end up in a similar state? So yeah, there's sort of a meditation on that.
I mean, we've seen this team kind of talk about substance abuse in the past. In a couple different ways, and I think this is them. I think exploring it in a different way, right? Because Michael, for the most part, seems to be like a more functioning person. I mean, that's
yes.
We could talk about that. And but I think like it's like a lot of opiate addicts in the Midwest in specific, right? Like they are able to live their lives, but they are 100% addicts, and they are doing all that they can to continue to get their opiates. Obviously, he's dealing with grief and all that kind of stuff, but I was kind of wondering, like, the whole we're all going down repeated from the previous issue, like this is a continuation, like a literal he's going down the tree, and all of these people live in the root system, and it kind of makes me wonder, like, is there some significance to them all being underground in this secret place? Like, he runs into his quote-unquote daughter who is already underground, and I think that's a really, maybe this is the commentary here, is that they're all underground because they're dead or something like that, or they fall into the ground, and she is never been born because he ended up dying or something like that. We don't even know why he's exploring this family tree, right? He is just falling down this thing. Like, is he already dead? Is he making his way to meet with the people who previously died from it, in his life? You'd think that there would be more people down there, but maybe there was a significance to this addiction being the thing. They all mentioned this idea of the hum in their chest. I wonder, I really want to suss out what that means, and I'm just not smart enough to figure it out, Nick. I'm here admitting this to you on this podcast.
I mean, I didn't even think about that in terms of just a literal question of like, what is a man literally doing in a tree, right? And I just sort of was like, oh, this is like a conceptual idea, right? I didn't even think about it literally. But in terms of like the daughter thing, I just sort of looked at that as, well, if his older relatives are at the top of the tree, and you would think, well, he must be at the base of the tree. Of course, he doesn't get there. He falls in the attempt to get there. And then his daughter is, subterranean, right? Because she's below ground, conceivably, because if you were born, you would be at the base of the tree, and she's not yet born, so of course she's under the tree.
Yeah,
makes sense to me for being a weird metaphorical story where you meet your not yet to be born daughter in a root system. But
I mean, I don't know, maybe there's a couple ways to interpret it, right? Because in my mind, family trees start at the bottom, and your eldest family is at the bottom, and you're further up on the furthest reaches of the branches, right? Alternatively...
Oh, I see. Okay.
Right, alternatively, though, the way that this story, I feel like, is being told is that the youngest folks are at the top and the oldest are at the bottom, but you come from the base, maybe. And you grow. I don't really know. Maybe the original idea of the family tree still holds true, right? Like, if you are the youngest, you are at the top, and you have to go all the way to bottom to meet your elders. But I still can't get past this idea of his daughter being underground, because you'd think that she would be a new branch further up in the tree if she was alive. But I think that you can also take that as like these branches signify living, or signify moments that are kept, but you as who you are goes back underground when you die to further nourish the tree to make it grow. I don't know. I don't know, man.
Well, yeah, and I think I'm right there with you in terms of like flowing with the story pretty well, and then getting to the underground stuff and being like, what the fuck? Like, what am I supposed to do? And it's easy to get hung up on that. I certainly got hung up on that. But I think it's also equally important to not get caught up in that, and to really focus on sort of the stuff with his daughter. And, he worries that he needs to warn her about his own struggles. And she tells him, you're likely going to have more of these issues, and that she knows that she will probably deal with these things too. But that, like, she's aware of that. And, I think there's sort of a, like, knowledge is power kind of thing that, like, yeah, about this, and you're at least aware and cognizant of these problems, and you're going to try, like, you're going to try your best, and maybe that's enough. And she shows him that door, right? She shows him to this door where you end up, like, meeting several of the relatives. I think it's the great-grandfather. I think it's his grandmother, and then his dad. I think those are the three. Sort of, it's this seemingly conceivably impossible family reunion where they are basically, sort of reunited at this bar location,
right? And with the irony being that they're saying they're going to break the cycle by, like, continuously pouring alcohol into their body.
Break the cycle by cheering. Let's all do a cheers to break the cycle.
Yeah.
But I do think it's sort of this moment where they basically say, like, it's easy to look back on your past and to, like, make these people dramatic figures, or to demonize these figures.
Sure.
But you need to also just simply realize that they're people. Like, quite simply. And not put them on a pedestal, and not, like, demonize them, but just acknowledge that they're individuals. And, like, this gets into, like, this is where Nick goes off the off the track completely. But I think that this idea that I was talking about earlier, with, like, the geometric symbols, like, if the triangle or the cone is Rick, then I think the diamond is the symbol of Caleb. And if you look at that scene at the reunion, you can see this diamond on the back of the chairs.
God damn it, Nick.
You can also see it on the light fixtures that are coming down from the ceiling.
Interesting.
You also see the diamond at the end of the small story in the first issue, the court scene. And yeah, I don't know if there's like what you can read into that, but if you notice, this diamond symbol seems to show up around Caleb, and this triangle symbol seems to show up around Rick. And I guess if you consider the diamond to be the whole symbol or the symmetry or the completed symbol, or it sort of fits in with Caleb's idea that like everything is whole, like everything is a unified, we are all one, or whatever he says all the time, like we are all the same or whatever. I don't know, like read into that, folks. Like this was my crazy geometry deep dive into things, but I think there might be something there with that big giant purple diamondish symbol and its reoccurrence. So
but we'll have to keep notes on that.
I'm losing it, folks. I'm losing it.
Let's move on to issue 27, the Morphometasis. Nick, what's this issue about?
This issue is whether or not you read The Metamorphosis by Kafka, or whether you want to lie about it, or whether you went on Wikipedia for 2 minutes.
Or if you can tell us whether or not Kafka actually described the character as a cockroach or not. That's the barrier to entry for this issue, right?
Yeah. That's. I mean, I didn't fucking read The Metamorphosis. Sorry, folks.
Well, I did. So this is going to be an interesting conversation. But
I'll put my English degree in the mail. You'll get it in 3 to 5 days.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's I mean, what can you say? It's called the Morphometasis.
Yes,
and the kaleidoscope image is bugs. And the subtitle. I say every issue is a subtitle, which we're going to break because the next issue actually is the first issue to not use the kaleidoscope pages and not use a subtitle, which is interesting.
We'll get to that.
The subtitle for this issue is "What Will You Become?" which is interesting. Do you want to try to outline this issue? I mean, can you try to outline this issue?
I mean, I can try to outline it, I guess. So this is an issue. I mean, my first note is, well, this is fun because I like the idea of people trying to spin on the ever classic metamorphosis of you turn into a bug and what happens. This issue opens with an old man who suddenly dies. And his ice cream falls on the ground, and a bug says, "Oh, this is too sweet." He meets up with, and the bug suddenly starts to get like narration. It's a cockroach. The cockroach runs over to his buddies, and we get the life of this cockroach as he slowly turns into a man over a series of time. We don't really know what it is, but it feels to me like overnight this cockroach goes from cockroach to human, and then suddenly we are snapped to a reality where this cockroach turned man is living a life and has a kid and has a day job, where his coworker is talking about the man trying to get him and he gets demoted, and there's extreme amounts of violence. I was genuinely feeling like shades of A Righteous Thirst for Violence for some reason at the end of this issue. But and there's this question of, is life meaningless? But at the same, that's kind of like the only thing that I could think of was like, there's a lot of Ice Cream Man references here, but I don't really know what to make of it other than this feels like, again, one of the like most anthological volumes. This issue in particular feels so just random in a good way, in the best way. It's what makes Ice Cream Man so interesting. I couldn't really find any major connections to anything. Instead, there's Ice Cream Man iconography all over, right? We see the Ice Cream Man desktop wallpaper. There's an ICM Times. There's no standing except for ice cream vans in the first part of the issue. But otherwise, it's just a story of this weird thing as a bug tries to compare its life to that of a human's, and recognizing so many things are futile and annoying and dumb about living the life as a human. A bug's life is so much simpler, and we could start playing whatever music you want, and we could talk about Kevin Spacey's A Locust, but that's not what I'm getting at here.
Play some Randy Newman. Randy Newman,
thank you.
Whatever the Randy Newman song from A Bug's Life.
So yeah, I don't know. This issue was interesting. I feel like it's It's the kind of chaos that we expect out of an Ice Cream Man issue, even down to the last moments of extreme violence. And I will say, like, this issue in particular did violence in the best way. I really, really have to admire Morazzo's just insane, brutal, violent pages that he has in the last couple of pages of this issue. So yeah, I don't know, Nick, what were your thoughts about this one?
Yeah, this for me is one of those issues where you can sort of tell that W. Maxwell Prince was like, this is the thing I want to mess around with. This is the thing I want to toy with. And sometimes it's not a real complicated thing, and it's not like a real lore-driven thing. But I think this issue honestly feels like I wanna play Kafka's work in reverse, essentially. I want the reverse transformation, and yeah, you have this bug named Grg, Grg, who of course becomes Greg after gaining human limbs, and confronts and scares a bunch of several people in the park who you might recall were actually discussing the events of Ice Cream Man 25, the plane. They're discussing the plane, which is interesting. This part I find really jarring to me, and if you want to get hung up on details like I sometimes do, I believe the issue literally says days later, and days later he wakes up and he's fully human, he has a job.
Okay. I missed that.
Yeah, it's literally days later. And it turns into that, what is that song where it's like, you wake up in a strange house, in a strange place, you know?
Yes.
And you're like, what am I doing with my life, or whatever? It feels like that. And you're right, there's definitely a lot of iconography. ICM is on the clock in the house. Holtz, which is of course the brand that we now associate with ICM.
Right.
Holtz is on the cereal. He even works for Holt Sales.
Yeah.
So go figure.
I couldn't remember if that was an ICM thing or if I'm just catching the name too often. But okay, you're yes.
Yeah, that Holt played a big part in the issue where it's like I don't remember if it's like a story within a story, but it's like the pulp detective who's trying to like investigate the company. And Holtz was the big corporation in that one.
Okay.
But the other kind of fun detail, which I had to do a little research on, because again, someone should take my English degree away, was that the son at the kitchen table for breakfast is reading, I think it's like Ovid for Kids.
Yeah.
It's like Ovid for Kids.
Yeah.
And Ovid's most famous work is Metamorphosis.
Ah, I see. Okay.
And I read a little bit about it, and I did. The work includes and discusses several different transformations throughout the whole. I think it's like an epic poem, technically. There are a couple other English majors who are coming to my house to take my degree at this point.
Right.
And Wikipedia says that these transformations are often, quote, located metatextually within the poem through grammatical or narratorial transformations, which I think is actually interesting, because when you look at the narration and the text within this issue, you can see that as he becomes more human, or when he becomes more bug at the end, the narration in terms of the grammar, the punctuation, the spelling, it all shifts. It all changes, and it progressively changes, in terms of like the complexity of his sentence structure and his spelling changes as he becomes more human. And so I did think that was kind of interesting.
And the way that he speaks ramps up significantly quickly, right? Like he goes from speaking in this really broken, misspelled English to like really beyond my reading level type English, you know what I mean?
Like,
it's really bizarre, and I wonder if there is like maybe more to this that you and I should probably be more well read to understand this comic book. But as to like why the rapid pace turns into that, or is it maybe just this idea that humans are far more complex than bugs? And I think Prince was just trying to hammer that nail down. Yeah,
but I think also towards the end of the issue we find out that like Greg's coworker basically, gets fired, doesn't handle that well, kills his boss, decides that he can't have witnesses, kills Greg. Just a stupid little detail I noticed here: when Greg falls down next to a car in the parking garage, the license plate on that car says ICM 27, and of course this is the 27th issue of Ice Cream Man. Haha, we're all so smart. Well, I mean, that was the same with the black box in issue 25. The plane's number was ICM 25.
I mean, these guys aren't that clever. We're gonna catch him if they're doing an ICM reference. One of us is gonna catch him.
Yeah,
Nick.
Exactly, no doubt. But I think my big picture takeaway, if you can have one, obviously, and even Greg thinks about it a little. You have him sort of weighing and juxtaposing his life as a human versus his life as a bug, in terms of which one does he find more enjoyment in, which one does he find more purpose in. And I think to some extent, I think he actually misses being a bug.
Oh yeah,
to some extent, and
yeah, got
more out of that. And so, we can look at the story and talk about the complexity of humanity and everything, but is that fulfilling? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think I mentioned this earlier. He really compares the simplicity of bug life being better because humans have so many things to do that feel unnecessary to him. And I, is this Morazzo and Prince pointing at the banality of life? Like so many things that we have to deal with that seem so unimportant to us, just getting on with our day. I mean, of course, right? Like that seems to be like a core point of a lot of the I think Ice Cream Man themes in a lot of issues is like we do so much dumb shit. Like, what's the point of it? That seems to be like the motif that or the MO that like Ice Cream Man seems to have, whereas Caleb is like, no, like all of this matters because everything matters. And of course that's the big back and forth here. So I like that this kind of revisited that without having to have Ice Cream Man kind of come up and say like none of this matters directly to our face. I think we're supposed to really take that away from the story, because when this guy dies, he dies with this smattering of blood that looks like a bug, and he died no different than he would have if he was a bug in some ways, squashed under the foot of someone who just happens to have more power than him. In that moment, it was a guy with a gun.
Yeah, and I mean, again, as you said, the brutality of those sequences was just like, like you felt it. You definitely felt that, and kudos to Martin Morazzo.
Yeah, dude, that gunshot to the face scene that was something. That was something else.
Yeah.
I mean, not to celebrate violence or anything, but geez, oh Pete's.
Martin, is that page for sale?
Yeah. Well, Nick, let's move on. Let's talk about issue number 28. Yeah. Wrap this whole thing up. Tell us about the etymologist rises. I
see what you did there, unintentionally or not.
No, I just can't speak.
Well, I wanted to give you an out. So yeah, we have the etymologist rises. As I said, this issue is interesting because it is, at least to my recollection, the first issue that does not use the kaleidoscope intro pages or outro pages or have a subtitle. Instead, the cover page looks like a page ripped straight out of a dictionary and features words that start with E. And then the credits page just looks like the opening page of a dictionary. So, what is this issue about?
The quick version, Nick. Yeah, I'll pay you $100 to give me the quick version.
The real quick version would be, you have this guy named Brian Gartner. He is out with a cheap Halloween costume, Indiana Jones getup, in the mountains somewhere. I don't think it's definitely called out, but it feels like the middle of like the Andes Mountains or some desolate place you don't want to be. And he is attempting to get his hands on, like, I think he calls it like the word.
Yeah, he's looking for
the
like
word that unlatches the locks is what he calls it.
Yeah.
He's a very self-important, smug little fuck, and he loves talking about the origins of words, but he always seems to be talking about like Germanic words and Old English words, and he's very he doesn't, for someone obsessed with words, he doesn't seem to have a real great linguistic grasp on multiple languages. For starters, he doesn't know the language of the guy that's navigating them, and he is slowly ascending this mountain. As he goes up, things get more treacherous, things get more dangerous, but he knows that what he is trying to reach is at the top of this mountain peak, and along the way, things get pretty messed up. I think that would be it.
Yeah, without fully spoiling the end, yes, that sounds like a good summary. I thought this issue was kind of, it was trying to lead us somewhere that I didn't think it was going to go. And I was surprised by the end of it, because my takeaway from the last 2 or 3 pages was, oh, like, this is the beginning of, like, the next step, I think, in Ice Cream Man in some ways. Because I think that, you know, we get this whole, this guy's an idiot, this guy's kind of a dummy, vibe from him. He's very intolerant. He's very much just like an explorer out to explore. He's got a greater cause, like an alchemist.
He's there to eat, pray, love.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. He's an alchemist that's looking for his great work, you know? And it's this word that nobody seems to know about except for him. And, you know, I find it interesting that this is the way that the storytellers here use to kind of unlock where I think Ice Cream Man has been for a while. Right? He's been kind of up on a mountain meditating. And it's such a weird thing, because I'm like, why? But also the big reveal of the way that this guy speaks the word is significant, I think, for the whole series. So I don't know. I thought this was like a really cool issue that played with like really standard dumb tropes and resulted in some really cool Ice Cream Man lore. So
yeah, it's, oh God, like there's a lot to unpackage here, and I think part of it is like, we get it, like W. Maxwell Smith is very smart, and he wants to have a discussion about like the meaning of words and what power that imbues or doesn't.
Sure.
But I also like that this idiot of his, like Brian, is such a stupid dork. I wrote quote, he feels like the I am a white male explorer absolutely making no attempt to blend in, and this is the clothing I think I need when I am exploring outfit. Yeah, you know, he doesn't seem to bother, he doesn't care about learning the local language, and like when they try to offer explanations for like things or whatever, he's like, yeah, okay, like let me tell you the old English origins of this word, and they're like, all right, great, that's cool. So he's a real dork, which helps because that means we don't have to feel real bad when terrible things happen to him. So that's convenient.
Were you thrown at all by the fact that they just kind of batted their eyes at a monstrous spider?
Right. Yeah.
Like,
he wakes up and there's this just gigantic spider, and one of the guides says, "Oh, that's one of his creations," and it's like,
Oh yeah. I mean, I had a feeling that we were going to get to something with Ice Cream Man. I just didn't think it was going to be so, like, plain in some ways. And I don't say that as like an insulting thing, because I think that the plainness of it adds like a depth to the story, rather than it just being Ice Cream Man up on a mountain fucking around. Instead, it's like, no, he's actually been up here and he's been doing something. What that is, we don't really know, but we see these rainbow flowers kind of come up a couple times in the story, and they're just kind of there. They make a tea out of them, and they aren't really relevant into the last pages of the story, where, you know, Ice Cream Man, who is this monk, I assume that's who he is. You know, he's been smiling, he's got this big beard, and he's chilling. The flowers aren't anything of significance until he says, oh, by the way, they're poisonous, and then this guy falls to the ground. And the thing that I took away from that moment was there was the little like musical notes that were like painted in the rainbow colors. We've seen that many times in this series, right? I always took it as like, haha, this is kind of a funny jingle that kind of wraps up the issue or something like that. And it was especially prevalent in the issue that we talked about before, with the guy who was playing music, and he kind of had like, it was like one of the few positive stories that we got, where this guy like got everything that he wanted. And to me, it makes me kind of recontextualize all of those times that we saw those musical notes, because is that Ice Cream Man or whoever's using this, whatever power that's creating these types of word bubbles, is that them writing something to reality? Like, as soon as it's said with these word bubbles, with these special little musical notes, something seems to have come true. And I'm wondering, like, in all the other times, is there power
behind it?
Right. Is there power behind these musical note like things? And have they been fucking with us the entire time, this goddamn creative team? You know?
No, you're right, because I didn't even think about that. Like, I think people look at that, or at least I did, after the like issue 3, and I go, oh, this is like a callback motif. That's kind of clever. Or it's like it's a calling card for Ice Cream Man, but not that there was like power being, you know, transmitted or sort of a command being uttered with it. So that is interesting.
But to go into the bit from the whole, you know, issue, you know, the word that unlatches the locks, like, the locks of reality, the locks of safety, the locks of imagination, right? Ice Cream Man wants and can manipulate time and space in so many different ways. Is it because he knows the word? And other people in the series saying lickety split and all these other things that we associate with Ice Cream Man, are they them trying to, emulate what Ice Cream Man is able to do just by singing this song, or maybe just saying these words? Maybe it's not even music. That's just the iconography that they've decided to associate with those word balloons. I think this is where we say Mike has been looking a bit too much into this series here. I don't know.
It's okay. I had a long discussion about triangles and diamonds earlier. I think you're fine.
Okay, good.
I mean, here's my question, right? Because this issue clearly has some association with issue 25 or the extra story in issue 25.
Oh, of course.
Right?
Yeah.
And there's a point where, there's several points where Brian sleeps. He goes to sleep and he has these crazy dreams, and the first time he sleeps and he's woken up, he's interrupted from sleep, it's the spider. But the second time, just before he wakes up, he sees the judge or the father figure. He sees the judge and Caleb, and the judge says, "Wake up, Mr. Gartner," and Caleb says, "Where's Sam?" Sam being the name of the guide. And Brian wakes up and he tries to track down Sam, and he finds Sam. He finds half of Sam in the clutches of what looks like a yellow Chewbacca on meth or something, in a cavern.
Yeah.
But it made me wonder. It's are they trying to warn him? Are they trying to help him?
Well,
because it doesn't even matter, right? Because eventually the guide, later, the guide is this shit is fucked up. I am going down the hill. And Brian's well, I'm going straight to the top. And the guide is yeah. Brian's yeah, I'm going to the top. I'll see you later. And the old man is you will not see me again because you are going to die.
Yeah, I mean, I took that as, I don't know. I wasn't seeing that as like a portal into the previous issue. Obviously, it's tied together, but his first dream was like a weird manifestation of this idea that he was trying to find, right? And the second time he dreams, it's like he's seeing another quote-unquote hallucination. We just happen to know as readers that it's a look into the thing that we had seen before in issue 25.
The Great Procession, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that in his first dream, the world talks to him about what's happening outside of his dream. And in the second one, I took that as he was watching maybe this happen in his dream, but when they speak to him, that's his own mind kind of bleeding into the dream. We all do that, right? Where you're sleeping and then all of a sudden, right as, there's a car driving and it turns to hit you and then suddenly you wake up and your alarm goes off, right? That kind of stuff still happens to people. I think that's what they were doing here. I don't know if there's really more to look into it, but as we typically do with Ice Cream Man, we tend to look into things far too deep. So maybe you're right, Nick.
Well, I also looked at it sort of in issue 25 when we suddenly cut to the two junkies, right? And I said, well, maybe all things are able to see all other things, or all time is simultaneous. Is this man climbing the mountain and this otherworldly trial thing, is there some simultaneity or ability to see between these things?
Yeah
Also, if you want to go ahead.
I was gonna say, in that moment where he does reach the top of the mountain, they're kind of in a null space, right? They're on the top of the mountain, but there's nothing around. There's no background. And this issue in particular has been very good. I think Morazzo does a great job of establishing where they are, climbing up the mountain. I mean, God, you look at this volume alone, you can see the range on this guy, drawing anything from exploded planes all the way to extremely detailed nature scenes and big hairy meth-fueled Chewbaccas. But it's very pointed to know that when he gets to the top of the mountain, it's just the Ice Cream Man in his full hippie regalia, and there's nothing around them. All the backgrounds are white. I think there's something significant to there. I think, if this guy made it to the top of the mountain, did he make it to this place where maybe realities are touching each other? Maybe there's a place where Ice Cream Man, aka Ricardus, is in this purple diamond jail thing, but he's also on Earth, at the top of this mountain or something like that. I mean, this is me again, really, really reaching for some sort of connection here, but I think that it's definitely something to note that there's no backgrounds, there's no detailed anything, there's no nighttime sky. It's just them on the top of the mountain with white in the background.
Well, and doesn't Rick utter the same words that are in the end of issue 25, where he says, like, I see, like, now we begin the great trial of Ricardus, or something like that. He says something to that effect, and I'm like, well, that's interesting, because you're not in shackles in whatever. Like, you seem quite content and quite free. So
yeah, no,
you're
right.
What does that mean?
Right, I forgot. Like, his text bubbles are in purple for that moment, and he says that we all will bear witness to the grand and final trial of Ricardus. Is this the end of Ice Cream Man, Nick? Is the next arc the final arc?
Well, it's fun, right? Like, isn't it interesting that he's using the same words, right? He's using the same words as the judge, and yet he seems quite free. He seems quite happy, and it's hard to ignore that this is juxtaposed with, we do have the dreams. The dreams do intercut with that procession and with the judge and Caleb, and so what does that mean? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a tough one.
Why do we do this to ourselves, Nick?
Yeah,
we come to this series and we read it every month, and it feels like we're somehow after all this time still left with more questions than answers. What are your final thoughts on this volume? I just want to know. What are your final thoughts here?
It's a satisfying volume. I think readers who are wondering if we're going to ever see some sort of momentum, I feel like this volume provides it in several issues, and I think it also manages to have some of that poignancy and emotional heft that we've come to appreciate, especially in some of the more recent volumes, where maybe not everything has to be terrible, not everything has to be gruesome, not everything has to be scary. Especially even like when I think about like the Advent calendar issue, right? And like, that's not, I don't really look at that and go like, okay, well, here's the sinister undertones or whatever or whatnot. It's just about the human condition, and there are issues like that we've seen recently where it's just like, oh, this is just an issue about having a relative who's losing their memory, or this is about dealing with addiction, and specifically you'll see more of that in an issue for the next volume, and it's just exploring those things. And I think at one point that was like bugging me, and I'm like, okay, like, where's Ice Cream Man, where's Caleb, where's the momentum? What terrible thing is going to happen to person X and Y inevitably, because we know it will happen, right? And and eventually you're like, whatever this is, it's fine. It's almost like slice of life, but it's not. But like, as slice of life tends to be pretty sunny in some ways, and I wouldn't say that this is like dark, terrible slice of life, but it's very much like just neutral gray normal experience, and sometimes that's not a terrible thing to read. I don't know.
I mean, I
follow
follow
you. What do you take?
I definitely follow that line of thinking. Like, there is nothing that is so dark and sinister about this series that it makes me kind of feel like, oh man, I'm gonna have to read Ice Cream Man and it's gonna just be brutal and depressing, right? There is like a levity to this whole series that's it like underpins everything that happens, and I know that's because there's this idea of like a jester or evil character that I think we all kind of enjoy reading. Clearly, you and I do, but at the same time, there's like it allows for bright moments and dark moments without it saying we're only gonna do the dark moments, and I think that we see this in this issue. We see characters rise and fall in a way that is very, I don't know, unique to this series. And I don't know, like you said, this whole issue, or this volume being 4 issues and being really satisfying is totally true. I blasted through this issue and I loved every moment of it, maybe more so than previous volumes, right? And I think that's just proof that, one, this series is fantastic, but two, that like there's so much that this book offers every single volume. You never know what you're going to get, and that is the draw for me. Is like, I know what the core conceit is, and this isn't like watching a Chucky movie, right, where you know that Chucky's going to come alive, he's going to kill some folks who don't believe that he's a real scary doll. It's like, no. Ice Cream Man is going to constantly try to circumnavigate your expectations, and when it does meet your expectations, you're going to be satisfied, and when it doesn't, you're going to be surprised, but in a pleasant way. And that's what this book has done for us. And we're finally getting lore. That's also what I really want. Like Morazzo and everyone working on this book, Prince and all the folks, like they've done something to really make us chomp at the bit for this thing. But the fact that we haven't gotten it and still find the book satisfying, issue after issue, is proof that they're doing something super solid here. So I don't know. I love this volume. This was great. This is such a fun read. Even for being 4 issues long, I can't wait for the next one.
Yeah. And as someone who I think is done with the next volume already in single issues, you've got a lot to be excited for. It's really solid, and I hope that however this book continues to be made, it just continues to work out, because sometimes I look at this book and I go, I don't know who else is maybe still reading this.
No.
I'm happy that there's other people, because
well, I have to think that a lot of people are in the same boat as us, right? They really enjoy the unexpected direction that this book constantly goes without ever straying from what you want out of this book. There's always going to be something brutal. There's always going to be something extreme. There's always going to be something fantastical in a strange way, whether that's a positive thing, a negative thing, or whatever. So I don't know. I feel like there's a readership out there. I don't want to jinx this book, so Nick, we're gonna stop talking about that. But
that sounds good.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the next volume, and we'll have to do volume 8 pretty soon here, because I think it's gonna drop in a moment, since it's been so long since we've done one of these. So
yeah,
I guess to wrap things up for Ice Cream Man Volume 7, I'll say check us out on Patreon and all that stuff. We recorded this way in the past, so I don't even know what next week's topics is gonna be. But make sure to check us out on the internet, on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Discord, Goodreads, all that link and stuff. They're going to be in the show notes. Support us on Patreon. There's episodes debut there first. We've got a bunch of stuff that's only available on Patreon, like the IRCB Movie Club, Saga of Saga, and so much more. Infinity Shred does all of our music. They're the best band in the universe. I want to say thank you to Zander, and I guess that's it. He's an ice cream man in itself, here on IRCB. I want to say thanks to Nick for recording this with me. Thank you for everyone out there for listening and supporting us on Patreon. And until next time, comics are good, and so are you.